liturgical reading today comes from a book by Barbara Brown Taylor called The Seeds of Heaven. The problem with miracles is that we tend to get mesmerized by them, focusing on God's responsibility and forgetting our own. Miracles let us off the hook. They appeal to the part of us that is all too happy to let God feed the crowd, save the world, do it all. We do not have what it takes, after all. What we have to offer is not enough to make any difference at all, so we hold back and wait for a miracle, looking after our own needs and looking for God to help those who cannot help themselves. Our bottom line here is to stop waiting for a miracle and participate in one instead.
Scripture reading is from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 12 through 17. As sunset approached, the 12 came and said to Jesus, "Dismiss the crowd so they can go into the surrounding villages and countryside and find lodging and food, for this is a remote and isolated area." Jesus answered them, "Give them something to eat yourselves." The disciples replied, "We have nothing but 5 loaves and 2 fish. Do you want us to go and buy food for all these people?" There were about 5,000 gathered. Jesus said to the disciples, "Have them sit down in groups of 50 or so." They did so and got them all seated. Then taking the 5 loaves and 2 fishes, Jesus raised his eyes to heaven, said a blessing over them, broke them, and gave them to the disciples for distribution to the crowd. They all ate until they were satisfied. And when the leftovers were collected, there were 12 baskets full.
Would you pray with me? Gracious and holy God, let us open our hearts and our minds to your touch, to you deep within us, that we might be emboldened to act, to love, to give. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of each of our hearts be filled with your grace and your wisdom. Amen. So can you imagine a crowd of at least 100 times what's sitting right here? Probably more. While the scripture says 5,000, scripture typically just counted men at that time. So there were probably more than 5,000 if you include women and children. So maybe we're talking 6,000, 7,000 people in a remote, isolated area. In Luke, it's a sermon on the plain. In Matthew, it's a sermon on the mount. And so they're sitting out on a plain, according to Luke, and Jesus is walking among them, and he's talking to them, and he's touching them, and he's helping them. And it gets to be a really long day. And at the end of the day, the disciples go to Jesus and they kind of nudge him and they go, "Jesus, don't you think we should send them off to get some food? They got to be getting kind of hungry." Now, nobody's said anything yet about being hungry, so I'm thinking the disciples are ready to eat. And Jesus looks at them and says, "Oh, why don't you give them something to eat?" And they probably looked at each other like, "What? He's gone completely off his rocker now." "Jesus, we got 5 loaves and 2 fish. How do you want us to do that?" Surely hoping that he's going to come to his senses and go, "Yeah, you're right. Go ahead and let him go." But he says, "Just have them sit down in groups." Now, it's sort of interesting, the way that the disciples and Jesus come at things differently. The disciples seem to have this operate out of a sense of scarcity. There's not enough. I don't have enough. We don't have enough time. We can't do this. And Jesus operates out of a sense of plenty. Oh, we've got 5 loaves, 2 fish, that's plenty. I got plenty of time. I got plenty of me to go around. Barbara Brown Taylor says he sort of operates out of the concept that where there is plenty of God, there will be plenty of everything else. And so they sit down, and he, in an act reminiscent of our communion services even today, he takes that bread and he blesses it and he breaks it. And then they pass it out, and when they collect it at the end, there are 12 baskets full of food left over. Now, I have to admit that I have always been one to question things. I have always been one to want to be reasonable and logical. I took a logic class in college. I got an A+ in my logic class in college. So, have you ever wondered how that happened? You know, okay, so somebody takes a hunk of bread off and it grows back. Thank you, Scott. Or they take a loaf out of the basket and another one appears. I mean, seriously. This is what we've talked about all these thousands of years, is that this miracle happened. These 5 loaves turned into enough to fill up 12 baskets. How did that what did it physically look like? So Barbara Brown Taylor suggests something different. So imagine you're one of those people that went out to a remote, isolated spot to see Jesus. Clearly you're going a ways, right? And you're prepared to spend the day there. Do you go empty-handed? No. What do you take with you? Food. Probably some food. Probably, to bring blankets, sit on the ground, the itchy grass. Maybe a water skin, or a lion skin, even better. But maybe you've all been sitting there kind of tucking it in your pouch or under your robes because you're afraid you take it out. Well, you don't know these weirdos sitting next to you. Not sure you want to share with everybody. And so you've kept it all hidden. And then suddenly, I wasn't pointing at Greg. But if you want to claim that, that's all right. Suddenly, here's Jesus, the guy they came out to see, who's taking everything, all the food that he's got, 5 loaves and 2 fish, and he's sharing it. And suddenly people are going, well, okay, if Jesus can do it, well, I guess we can do it too. And maybe they start pulling out their hunks of bread and the cheese that they made and their wine skin, and they're unwrapping things, and suddenly what happens over food? Even at the state fair, you sit on a picnic bench with a bunch of other people and you start chit-chatting. Oh, where are you from? How long have you been here? Oh, do you know I think my sister's cousin's husband's father was from there. Do you know them? This is what's happened from the beginning of time, right? We start to get to know one another, and we laugh, and we tell stories, and we talk about what Jesus, did you hear what Jesus said? Boy, I found that really interesting. What do you think? What do you think about this guy? And suddenly all of these people who've come as sort of as individuals and perhaps disconnected from one another, become community. Out of this small gesture, something bigger and greater happened. And they were blessed with friendships and conversation. And then when it's all said and done, and baskets are passed around to pick up whatever's left. There's 12 baskets full, which frankly for 7,000 people maybe is not a whole lot. But it's still more than those 5 loaves. Hey, it's a miracle. Is it? I don't know. Well, how do we define a miracle? That's sort of an interesting thing, isn't it? How do you define a miracle? Something you can't explain. Something wonderful.
Something physically impossible.
Something physically impossible. It's kind of, we don't usually think about it, but typically a miracle is something God does, right? That's wonderful and big and unexplainable. Something that God does. It's like God's intervention into human history. But then where is our responsibility and our role in bringing goodness into this world? Do we all just sit back and go, hey, let God feed them? Happened in the plains, should happen now. Jesus doesn't think that. Jesus doesn't say, oh, just sit around and wait. He says, you give them something to eat. They haven't asked. They haven't said they were hungry, according to the story. You give them something to eat. And then a miracle happens. Because they stepped forward with what little they had to share. Maybe you're saying, well, in that example, like, maybe that doesn't look like a miracle because it's just people doing what people should do, right? Being generous and sharing what they have. It's just the way the world should be. But maybe in this day and age, that would be a miracle. For us to sit down and start getting to know our neighbors and sharing what we have instead of, keeping it to ourselves. We tend to think that we don't have enough. Oh, I don't have enough skill, or I don't have enough talent, or I don't have enough funds. I'm afraid to step out and be the first one. That's a big one, isn't it? I'm not sure I don't want to be unless you're Shirley, you don't want to be the first one on the dance floor. Much less do you want to be the first one to risk. Boy, if I just put my 5 loaves out there, everybody's going to take them and then they're going to be gone and I'm not going to have any food. But perhaps we're called to participate in the miracles. Perhaps it's really how miracles happen. It's a story, true story. In 1920, there was the United Methodist layman who gave $100,000 to start a college in Liberia. Now, $100,000 is a lot of money now, so imagine what it was in 1920. Started a college in Liberia, and that college grew and flourished and brought hundreds and hundreds of African students' education and spirituality. In 1940, the administrators of the college decided they wanted to have an anniversary celebration, 20-year anniversary celebration, and they wanted to bring their benefactor over to see how the school had grown. Well, they found it was a little harder to find him than they expected. He had lost most of his wealth in the stock market crash in 1929, and he was living a modest life on the south side of Chicago. He denied seeing the representatives multiple times until he finally gave in and said, okay, I'll meet with you. And then at their insistence, they flew him to Africa for the anniversary celebration. And he was amazed at the hundreds of students with smiles on their faces and dreams realized in their eyes. And as he watched them, he turned to the college president and he said, the only thing I have kept is that which I gave away. It was that one chance, stepping out, one person doing something. It's another story about a family in Ohio. They weren't rich, they weren't poor. They lived in a country house. They were sitting down to dinner one night when they heard a knock at the door. And they opened the door, and there was an old man, kind of in tattered clothes, torn jeans, buttons missing, holding a big basket of vegetables and saying, "Would you like to buy some vegetables?" They wanted him to leave as soon as possible, so they bought some vegetables and sent him on his way. But he kept coming back. And over time, they made friends with this guy. He was very friendly, nice guy. They came to enjoy his company and look forward to him visiting once a week to sell them his vegetables. One week he came, and after they bought their vegetables, he said, "You know, I was blessed with something wonderful yesterday." He said, "I got home and there was a basket of clothes sitting outside my house." And they could see that he could use some clothes, and they said, "Oh, that's wonderful." And he said, "No, you know, the really wonderful part is I found a family to give the clothes to." The miracles we participate in. You know, from the two little girls that I talked about at Children's Time, who had lemonade stands and raised money for the homeless, to giving a gift of money, to just giving a gift of presence and compassion. You know, and it doesn't have to be something big. Maybe it's just a hug and a smile. Maybe it's a donation to a cause. Maybe it's volunteering tomorrow down at St. Luke's for the hot meal program. Maybe it's writing a note of get well to someone. Maybe it's bringing vegetables to share. I think that there are all kinds of little miracles and big miracles all over the place. But the key is not to just sit around and wait for God to make something happen, but to participate in the miracles. Amen.